talking now with Mark Smith, an award-winning author of books for and about young people. His very real post-apocalyptic series, starting with The Road to Winter, quickly found readers all across Australia and the world. And Mark, congratulations on your new book, If Not Us, which is firmly set in the now and absolutely a book for now, with its themes of climate change and corruption and community activism. I hoped you could maybe give us a quick intro into why you wrote this book, although I think I can guess.
Well, first and foremost, I've in the last few years, the way in which climate fiction has been written in Australia has almost been totally in a dystopian context. And I've been guilty of that as well, because in the Winter series, you know, there was quite a strong dystopian climate element as well. And it almost seems to me as being defeatist, that, you know, especially for in the young adult sphere, because what they're reading is, sorry kids, it's all over, it's too late, this is what we need to adapt to. So I was actually at one of the schools' Strike for Climate in pre-pandemic, so 2019, in Geelong. And I've been an environmental activist for a long time, and I've organised rallies, I've been to heaps of rallies, and I went along to this one and I was just blown away just by the passion and the excitement and the anger. You know, we know recently that there's been this idea coming from the coalition in Canberra that, you know, we need to get more chaplains into schools because kids are afraid of what, you know, is happening with climate. They're not afraid, they're angry. And I wanted to reflect that in the story that I wrote. So they were the two principal reasons that I wrote. And I went home from that rally and I started writing the book that night. I was just so, you know, I was so enthused by what I saw out on the streets of Geelong on that day.
And I really love the way you talk about young people and their anger, because I think I actually talked about this with Leanne in one of the other episodes, Leanne Hall, about like sort of respecting that anger that young people are feeling. It really comes across in Hess, your protagonist's voice, and it was such a strong voice. I think you do, I'm going to talk about place later, but you do voice and place so well. And did the book come with his voice, or was that something you developed?
No, it pretty much came with his voice. And it's interesting that you're talking about, we're going to talk about place later, but for me, voice and place are, you know, they're so closely linked, because I actually, as a writer, I begin with place. And I think that if I can find the place, I'll find the character. And I had the place and I had the kind of circumstances around that place. And here was this, he wasn't fully formed, but here he was. And that was Hess. And as we know, you know, he feels as though he's got a small voice, but he's actually got a powerful voice in the campaign that happens around this little town.
Yeah, and the way that he becomes involved in this community activism just rang so true, with a bunch of grown-ups in the town with their agenda, with their enthusiasm. And it was so beautiful to watch him be drawn in and to really discover for himself and make the choice to be part of it.
Obviously, he's drawn in by the female character, by Fenna as well. And so, by way of explanation, Fenna is an exchange student from the Netherlands who's sort of been misplaced in this town. She was meant to go somewhere else, and but she found herself in this little town where Hess was. And she brings that whole, and you know, I'm thinking of your book set in Paris here as well. She brings that whole sort of European perspective of this is what's happening, and this is the urgency, and this is the energy that's happening on the streets, and it's not just on the streets; it's behind the keyboards as well. And she brings that you know, that understanding with her, and of course, Hess is he's so smitten with her to start with, but he's also trying to come to terms with her emotionally and intellectually, and that's what I think. And the two of them together, they tiptoe into the campaign, but they find their place in it.
Yeah, totally. And Do you think that for young people, activism, becoming involved in activism is different to adults?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think that again, what I reflect on from having gone to those protests, the school strike for climate ones, is just it's almost like an emotional response, and it's an emotional response to begin with. But I was also really impressed with their grasp of the complexities of the issue. You know, I, I didn't I didn't speak to kids. I didn't hear kids speaking at that rally who was saying, look, just getting out and marching on the streets is going to change everything. They were fully aware that there was a hell of a lot of work that needed to be done, but first and foremost, they needed to be listened to. And they wanted to be listened to and acknowledged because, you know, in the end, it's their future that we're playing with. And that's what is making them so angry. So I think their response began from a place of concern and anger, and then it got into what are the actual mechanics of a campaign, and what makes a campaign successful.
I loved those scenes in your book where everyone got together at school, and they strategized, and they looked at what had been done before and made their plan. I worry that we are leaving the responsibility up to the young people.
It's a fine line to draw because you know, quite rightly they would say, well, you know, we don't want to be preached to by you people who stuffed it up in the first place. We're going to make our own way. But they're very savvy about strategies as well, I think, and the way, like, social media has changed campaigning just completely. And it brings an urgency to it and a relevance to it. When I was organising, large scale campaigns or rallies, I'm talking last century. You know, you would wait until the newspaper came out the next day to see how it was reported, and you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to check the reporting in the newspaper, or you check the evening news that night to see if you got a spot somewhere down near sport. You know, whether you got a 1 minute spot. But now the immediacy of it is just enormous, is huge, and that kind of, you can, that they can live stream from rallies into people's lounge rooms all around the world, and that changes things incredibly.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful.
And it's a major sort of turning point in the book, in the plot, where social media actually turns this small campaign into something that just goes global overnight. And I think that's a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of just how, the right piece of footage or the right photo at the right time in this instant, and it's in amongst millions of others out there, hundreds of millions of others out there. What is it about that one piece that makes people look at it and which makes it explode?
Yeah, absolutely. And giving a little bit of a guideline in your book about and how you might deal with that afterwards, because it is just a moment. It can go away just as fast as it turned up.
Yeah.
But it's really amazing to watch Hess and Fenner work through it. And I'm really conscious that the book, it's got its storyline, is amazing storyline of climate change activism and working against this power station in the town.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the book explores mental health and family, grief and loss. Were all those things, did they come together, or did they develop as you wrote?
No, they came together fairly organically. One thing that I always try to do is I try to build depth into the characters. So, the mental health aspect, dealing with anxiety that Fenner hides initially, but then exposes to Hess. And not only does that deepen her character, it deepens his character by the way he responds and reacts to it, accepts it. And in putting that into a book, I think it's important that, like, I don't want to write a book about anxiety, but I will normalize it by, and this was pointed out to me very beautifully by a fellow writer down here, Miranda Luby, in a post today when I was actually messaging her. And it is the normalizing of those issues that kind of almost highlights them more. So yeah, I was determined to do that, to build that in, and how it all comes together, I don't know. I guess that's the magic, because I'm not a planner when I write at all. Very much a pantser. I have a goal in mind, but how I'm going to get there, I've got no idea sometimes. And but I do have this. Kind of real mindfulness about pace when I'm writing, about the pacing of the writing and the pacing of the events, and particularly when you're writing for young adults, as you know, pacing is so important. It's so critical, because the moment you let them go, they're gone and they're back to their screens, and we've got to try and hold them in there, and without overwhelming, without it becoming too action packed, you know. So there's got to be those quieter moments, and you've got to do that slow revelation of character. And you know, it's a complex art, as we know.
You speak with a lot of knowledge. Is your background in teaching? Do you
Yes,
have?
yeah.
So
I think that, you know, we're talking a little bit about character there. I think that one of the things I think teaching brings to writing is that it's an understanding I have from my experience in education, that if you want a young person to understand an issue, personalize it. You know, personalize it for them. And as a fiction writer, we do that by creating characters that they can empathize with, and then and then they see issues through their eyes. And it does personalize it for them, because they become attached to that character, and that is what wells that issue up for them. But again, that's a very fine line to as a writer, because the moment they see that that's being done to them, their whole perspective on the book changes.
And have you had a chance to speak with young people about your books? Obviously, this, If Not Us, has just come out, but with the Road to Winter series.
Oh yeah, I've I do, I don't know. Well, pre-COVID, I was doing probably 60 or 70 school visits a year, and the beauty of it is that the Road to Winter is on curriculum in schools all around the country, so that gives me a foot in the door. So yeah, I get to speak to them a lot. I mean, what could be better than that?
And it sounds like you are quite an efficient writer. Thinking that you began this one in 2019, I know a lot of people aren't that quick. Your writing is a full-time career at the moment?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm lucky in that I don't have kids at home. I'm not homeschooling, and fortunately during COVID, a lot of the schoolwork has gone online now. So, given that I live in Anglesey, for me to do a school visit in Melbourne, I had to factor 4 hours driving into my day. Now I just walk through the door here, log on and say, "Hi, I'm Mark," and go into my presentation. Of course, it's different. You're not able to engage in the same way. But there's a lot of, in terms of efficiency and in terms of organising your day and allowing for writing time, that actually works pretty well. And I'm still very much an outdoors person, so my writing day begins early, like 6:30. If I come down into here and write for 2.5 hours, I put 1,000 words in the bank. That's it. I don't have to do anything else writing-wise for the day, other than the interminable emails and the little small business that you have to run as a writer. But I put that in the bank early, and then my day can be spent out doing the things that I really enjoy doing, and plus the things that stimulate me and influence my writing. Again, intellectualizing it, all of those things that I do out there, they just involve muscle memory. So if I go for a surf, I don't even think about it. It's just, I'm just out there. Oh, hey, I'm out here again. That's right. But it allows all of this headspace. So if I ever get caught up in a scene that I'm writing, I can't see a way out of it, or I'm trying to develop a character a little bit more, I've got so much what I call time to I call it writing away from the desk, which is just nutting that stuff out in this magnificent, beautiful environment. And then by the time I come back, I've basically sorted it out, and I can sit down and I can write. And to me, it's pointless me sitting and staring at a blank screen, because I'm not gonna sort anything out doing that. I need to get out and do something to distract myself and then work things out.
And that connection with nature and place is so clear in your book. You can basically smell the sea. And this new book does sort of almost feel like a continuation of the world that you created in Road to Winter. Is it based on your local area?
Yeah, it is, very strongly. And I approach place or setting almost as a character. I want it to be a character in the book, and because when you think about it, you develop character by their interaction with that setting, by the way they relate with it. So whether it be Finn out hunting in the bush, or Hess out surfing, we learn so much about those characters by the way they engage with that environment that's around them. So the environment is critical to it. And I loathe that idea of setting kind of just being background. Setting is everything. Setting is everything around your character. And I like to think of it as, it's the 1 meter around my character. That's my setting. What's happening in here, and that's the way you bring the reader into that setting as well. So it's integral to everything I write. And like I said before, I begin with setting, I begin with place, and if I find the place, I'll find the characters.
Yeah, amazing. Thinking about your series Road to Winter has done extremely well in Australia and gone on to the curriculum, which is so fantastic for any writer. But you've also been published overseas and received that very coveted starred Kirkus review, I noticed. And I was wondering if you would be happy to talk a bit about being published internationally.
Yeah, it's sort of, you're trying to examine it from a distance. It's wonderful to have the star reviews and good reviews and when you think about it, the pure economics of it, where we have a very small demographic here with a small population, 25 million people, of whom only a small proportion read fiction, of only a small proportion read YA. So it's a relatively small market. But if you've got 340 million people in the US, you only need to get your books into municipal libraries, or if you're lucky enough to get them into schools, then that becomes a much larger, obviously a much larger potential market. But I also, on a different level, I also love the idea that there could be this kid or adult in San Francisco or New York or Pennsylvania, and they're reading about this kid named Finn, and they're trying to imagine this town called Angari, and this girl called Rose, and this Siley girl called Kaz. And that bush that they're moving through, I love that idea that this story that only existed in my head 5 years ago is now, got all these people engaging with it. That's the buzzy bit. That's more important than the economics of it.
Yeah, Nick, you were talking before about how you want it to be layered. You want these characters to have depth, and you do that so effortlessly. It's just sometimes in passing, comments in passing, and those little things that you've created a real world makes the book so satisfying.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm very conscious of doing is utilising dialogue in order to create those little moments that you're talking about. And sometimes it's only a very short conversation that two characters will have. But if you go back and analyse it, and this happens, I'm not saying that I do this, absolutely deliberately. I go back and, that's pretty good. I'm well there. But particularly between male characters, I find, because of the economy of language that males tend to use when they communicate with each other, and there are so many, and plus and this is what I've learned from education, because I spent the last 15 years of my teaching career working solely with 15-year-old boys, and in a residential campus. I was head of a residential campus, an outdoor campus down on the coast here. And you clue into so much of the way they communicate with each other non-verbally. There's a lot of non-verbal communication, and sometimes it's just a nod of the head, and that's what finishes so many of the conversations between Theo and Hess. It's just that. But it's an acknowledgement. And so, again, that's drawing on all those years of teaching and bringing it into those characters, but trying to make it really succinct and tight. And that's what I like doing through dialogue.
I was wondering what you have been reading lately.
Well, funny you should ask. So I like to have 2 or 3 books on the go at any one time. So I like to have a short story collection because the short stories I can jump into and read quickly. And then, so at the moment I'm reading, working my way through Scott Gardner's collection of short stories.
Oh, great.
Off the Map, which I'm really enjoying. I love Scott's writing. I would read anything that he wrote. And I think he's one of the stars of young adult writing in Australia. I like to have a non-fiction on the go as well. So again, on the environmental theme, I'm reading Toxic by Richard Flanagan on the salmon industry in Tasmania, and I'm just becoming more and more horrified as I go.
Oh, no.
Page to page to page. And I'm really lucky in that I'm part of an online book club of authors and writers who got together. It's called the Apocalypse Book Club. It was put together by Bran Presser and Josh Pomare. And there's about a dozen of us. So we like to take on a text every month, and then we meet and basically we respond to the text. And so at the moment we're reading The Newcomer.
Oh, great.
By Laura Elizabeth Willett, which is really interesting as well. So, and that idea of, having a favourite writer to read, it kind of changes every month for me. We try and pick debuts if we can. We've been going for about 18 months now, and done a book a month, and all Australian, of course.
That's fantastic. I love that. And can you read while you write?
I have to. Yeah, that's my homework. So I try and read every day. And like you, I'm sure, like a lot of writers, when I'm reading, I'm trying to take it apart. I'm trying to figure out how'd you do that, and it's why this book club is really interesting, because it's all writers, and they're all writers reflecting on the writing process and of the person that we're reading. So we can be pretty harsh at times, but we're also, when we find it, when we one of the early ones we did was Song of the Crocodile, and you've just got all of these writers, oh my God, and how did she do that? And what an awesome, so sometimes it works really well for us. That
this episode is being supported by Torquay Books, and I highly recommend, when you can, heading down to this beautiful shop on the Surf Coast, Mark's Local. And if you follow the links in the description of this video, you can buy Mark's books and have a little virtual tour of their store. Thank you so much, Mark, for taking part today.
That's a pleasure. Again, thanks so much for thinking of me and having me part of it.
Welcome to Torquay Books. We're down here on Wadawurrung country, on the surf coast of Victoria, at the start of the Great Ocean Road. My name is Lynn, and I'm fortunate enough to be the owner of this beautiful shop.